Hey everyone, this is Austin from Spurdesigngarage. Today we're going to be taking a look at a drawing that a subscriber sent to me. It is a footwear design sketch. Super cool. I'm going to take you through the process that I would take to refine the design by hand and pen sketching, and then follow that up with a little bit of Photoshop sketching. All right, so before we get going on this redesign, do me a favor and like and subscribe this channel and this video. Helps me out with the YouTube algorithm and grows this channel. Primarily, I'm trying to keep the same gestures that Rodrigo had in his initial sketch, but I'm trying to figure out how to make some of these lines flow a little bit better. So what I like to do is start out with a pen sketch. This allows me to stay pretty loose. So I have a Bic crystal pen here, just a regular ballpoint pen and a pad of paper, nothing special. And I'm trying to allow lines to flow into each other, trying to allow them to create shapes and making sure that each of the lines sort of has a family feel. So you'll notice that there's a lot of really organic, swoopy lines in here that are so cool in the initial sketch of this design. Starting to block out some elements that I think could be kind of cool color blocking situations or options. And then just a slight indication of laces. Again, this is a really quick sketch just to make sure that I have a rough idea. So let's take his actual sketch, lower the opacity in Photoshop and throw a layer on top and begin to sketch over the top. This is a very soft brush. Basically trying to mimic either a pen or a pencil. You can use whatever you want, but I like to keep it fairly soft and small. And again, we're going to do the same thing. I'm referencing not only his underlay here, but also the hand sketch that I just worked on. Trying to make these shapes flow in interesting ways. And thinking through some of the realism of some of these elements too. So while I'm sketching, I'm making sure there's no actual like super harsh corners on any of these edges. And because that simply isn't realistic, all these materials are going to flow into each other and wrap around one another. And there's going to be soft edges pretty much everywhere. I'm drawing a few lines in certain areas and trying to figure out what looks best, and then erasing some of the things that I don't think work quite as well. You'll notice that I flip the canvas a lot. No matter what I'm sketching, I flip the canvas horizontally pretty much constantly to make sure I can identify anything that looks slightly off. And now I'm going in and adding a few details. You'll notice the collar lining in there, the lacing, and then darkening a few of these lines that I think need a little bit more refinement. Erasing out elements that I want to get rid of. And keeping everything pretty light. You don't need to go crazy dark. You don't need thick lines. But I'm just trying to make sure that I understand exactly where each of these shapes ends and where they begin. If you're pretty new to sketching footwear or cars, you can always reference things that are out there in the world, look at photos, and this will really help you make things that look realistic. Now, the silhouette that's in this particular sketch, I am exaggerating a little bit. The toe is a little bit thinner than it really would be in real life. It's a little bit sleeker overall than it really would be in real life. The heel is pretty pronounced and swoopy, and that's not necessarily entirely realistic, but you can exaggerate things to a certain extent, just don't overdo it. Now we're going to get into a simple Photoshop render. Nothing too crazy. This isn't going to be photorealistic, but I'm going to start blocking in color. And what I'm doing to block in color is using a hard edge brush and full opacity. I don't have pressure on. This is just completely filling in certain areas. And then I use the paint bucket to go ahead and drop in that entire area so that whole color block is set up. You can look online and see what kind of trends are out there for color inspiration. Again, you don't always have to look at footwear if you're coming up with a footwear colorway. Take a look at other products, architecture, animals, that sort of thing, and you can come up with some pretty interesting and unique things that haven't been seen in footwear before. And I'm trying to figure out a way to balance all these colors out. So there are different stories that you can tell with color. And in this one, I'm trying to keep the orange and the gray as fairly balanced with each other. Maybe a little bit more gray because that orange is so vibrant and so attention grabbing. I want to kind of tone it down just a little bit and call out only certain elements with that orange. And I'm envisioning this piece here as maybe a translucent overlay. So I'm going to go ahead and fill it in and then turn down the opacity later so that I get some of the material reading through. You'll notice that I turned down the opacity just a little bit. And then erase out some of those colors so that I can keep those dark blue laces in there. I'm using the background to my advantage. So the background is going to be some of the color of the shoe. Just little details, we'll add these little flecks into the laces for a little bit of added color. I adjust the hue and the saturation to those, just trying to find something that looks kind of interesting to me and looks balanced and unique. Now I'm going to go in and start shading pretty loose. So you can use a darker and a lighter shade of whatever color you're working on to call out, in this case, the initial shading. So each layer I'm going in, and each of these colors is its own layer. I'm going in and I'm creating clipping masks for each of these shades so that I can start to define the form, the shadow, the highlights, all that. And in this particular case, I'm using a soft brush primarily for a large soft brush primarily for shading these elements. And then occasionally I'll be erasing those either with a soft eraser or a hard eraser. I'm going around and adding highlights on some of these overlays to make them look like they have a little bit of a lip or depth, thickness to that material. So this translucent overlay will have a little bit of a highlight on this upper edge. I'm thinking about the lighting situation as basically being a top-down situation just to keep it fairly simple. Now I'm going to look at the upper and start to further shade that out. Hard eraser around this soft brush. And I think this is on a multiply layer. Now I'm going in with an overlay layer with a white brush and starting to add highlights. And these shading layers are over the top of the entire shoe sketch. So I'm not going layer by layer and creating clipping masks anymore because these are broad shading layers. Starting to define some more of the forms in the midsole. Showing that this midsole is wrapping around. None of these things are flat, so you need to show that it's wrapping in 3 dimensions. And I'm going to start experimenting a little bit with material here. So you'll notice I put a clipping mask of this material that I found online that looks somewhat like suede. And I'm going to erase it out. Make sure that it's on the layer that I want and play around with the different layer styles. So I think, again, this was on maybe overlay or multiply layer. And I'm going to start adding in some details like stitching. Some of these other materials I'm not going to actually put in for the sake of this sketch. I don't think it's entirely necessary. This is a pretty quick one. And you'll notice I just dropped in a color or a layer adjustment to that stitch layer. I'm going to add in a few perfs. These are basically just dark, round, hard brushes. And then I'm going to put those on a drop or a bevel and emboss layer. Make them look like they're actual holes. This shoe is kind of fading into the background a little bit. So I'm going to put a layer in the background and start to add a little bit of contrast so that you see the edge of the shoe a little bit more. Erasing that background out of some of the shoe and just giving that this interesting faded look to this background layer. Adding a little bit of contrast and of course, you have to sign it. So this was a super awesome sketch. I had a lot of fun redoing it. It was great to begin with, but these are just some tips to maybe enhance it just a little bit in Photoshop and think through some of the decisions that I've made in regards to design. If any of you guys have a sketch that you want to send in and have me do this for, just let me know and I'll be sure to put together a video. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and I hope you have a great day.